All right, hi everyone. My name is Kelly, and I am Solutions Director at iBwave. And welcome to the Just Demo to showcase our new product, iBwave Viewer Plus. I'm going to quickly go just through a few slides to give background on, who this product is for, some of the problems it solves, and then more excitedly, my colleague Isam, who's here with me, is going to give you a quick demo, and then of course we leave some time for questions at the end. Okay, so essentially, you're working in a wireless design project. We know that it takes a lot of people to actually make that project work, right? You've got a team of project managers, the RF designers themselves, who are typically using iBwave Design to design out the project. And then you've got those who do the review of those projects. And then, of course, the teams in the field who are typically out there, kind of doing the installation. And throughout all of those different phases and within all of those teams, they need access to information about the design itself in order to do their job as autonomously kind of as they can, right? To make it efficient, and also need a way to collaborate easily within the design project. But that isn't necessarily easily to do today, right? There's limited access to the design files unless you've got a full license of iBwave Design. It's hard to get at the information. Um, in order to do those jobs, right? And then the feedback channels can typically be somewhat fragmented. If you have a team in the field, they don't have an easy way to necessarily relay information, like a cable needs to be rerouted from the original design plan this way, or maybe a radio needs to be moved this way. And so typically that's done either in meetings or in email, and so it can get a little bit fragmented. And all of that can lead to longer, delivery life cycles. So those are some of the pain points that we've heard from the teams that are working in and around the iBwave design files. Now we do have today iBwave Viewer, which has been around, which helps people to get access to that design information, but it's still quite limited in what you can do with it. So we have iBwave Viewer Plus now, which is a version of Viewer, but it gives you a lot more access to the information that you need when you're moving your way through the project life cycle, right? So it's giving you a lot more access to key design information, things like um, the properties of the walls or the properties of the parts. You have much more control over the design canvas itself. So what I mean by that is when you open it up, you can actually move things like the labels around. The parts often get stacked on top of each other. So you can start for visibility, you can move the labels around, you can move the parts around to see, you can turn your legends on and off. So just a lot more control with the file and how you interact with it itself. And then we've added a way in order to help streamline that feedback process. So what you can now do is add push pins with your comments directly on the floor plan. So that example of someone in the field, they have to move a cable, they can add a push pin, add their comments, and then they can generate a report, which is a PDF that sends it back to the RF design team. And now it shows exactly where on the floor. You can add a picture in there to show them. So it just helps with that collaboration piece. So I'm going to hand it over to Isam here, but just to give you a high-level overview of some of the things he's going to show, as I mentioned, is you can do things like view part wall properties. You can move your parts and labels around. You can now add and turn legends on and off. You can see the connector info, the floor siblings. You could lock and unlock and move layers around, so you have that interaction. And of course, the ability to add the push pin and run that annotations report, which is your. So that's it for my part. I'm going to hand it over to Isam now, and he'll show it to you in action.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kelly. Yeah. So thanks for giving us that breakdown of Viewer Plus and who it's really aimed at and who it's targeting here to improve the overall workflow and life cycle of a design project through all of the stages, all of the back and forth that happens today during the life cycle of a project, right? So I'm going to put on my design reviewer hat here, and we'll walk through maybe a quick project review and validation. I want to reiterate, right, like I'm not putting on my RF designer hat here. I'm not someone who's going to be modifying the design or making adjustments or changes or replacing parts and components. I'm really reviewing the design, and I'm going to add any feedback, from a managerial perspective, or maybe even from a construction and engineering perspective, or even maybe from a field team perspective, right? So I might include things like requests to move things around, or to ask questions even, if there's something that's unclear out of the design, maybe I want some more clarity or information about something. That's the type of review and validation that I'm going to be doing here. So here I've got a project open in iBwave Viewer Plus. So if you're familiar with iBwave Viewer, you'll probably already notice some of the changes in the UI here. We've got a more in the basic viewer, you have everything laid out in a single ribbon. Here you've actually got, some more capabilities, more functionality laid out. So you actually have some ribbons to help you organize the user interfaces and everything that's available to you in Viewer Plus. Okay, so the first thing, let's start with project validation, right? Looking at the project settings, looking at the setup. First thing I'll indicate is right from the file menu, you have the option to, of course, browse for an iBwave file, but you'll also notice now the open from server option. So this will let you actually open up a project from iBwave Unity. If you have an iBwave Unity server configured and you have a connection to an iBwave Unity server, you can grab a project from iBwave Unity, right? And that really, reinforces the collaboration aspect of Viewer Plus, right? Unity is the centralized platform where users can, upload their revisions. They can manage an entire project throughout its life cycle, from, the rough order magnitude to the preliminary design, to the site survey, to the final design, all the way to the installation. So having a connection to iBwave Unity lets you be a part of that workflow as an iBwave viewer user, right? So you're not just in the background in read-only mode, and this actually lets you plug into that workflow through iBwave Unity. But of course, once you've got the project open, right now, you can start doing your validation. And again, I'm validating this as a manager or a design reviewer. And you'll see the same list of project properties that you're used to from Viewer. You do have the general requirements. You can validate some of the things like the initial requirements for the project. If it's an active DAS, you can review some of the active DAS configurations, make sure the power sharing commissioning is all set accordingly. You can review some of the system properties, the capacity definitions, but you also have some capability to modify the presentation in the application, right? So preferences, you can set different project templates, you can set the part and floor plan label, fonts. So you can make some changes here to kind of fine tune the presentation to your liking. Company info, of course, if you're going to be, even as a viewer user, you have the ability to generate some reports, and you might want to be able to include some of your company information in those reports you'll be generating. Making sure you can set the units according to your needs or your preference, depending on where you are and what type of units are standard in your region. And then, of course, part ID templates, right? But you can also validate and review some of the RF properties, like things about technology-specific parameters, like for LTE, 5GNR, making sure your power settings are, according to standards. And also, very importantly, the EMF settings, right? So if you're part of the installation team, or you're part of the design review team who wants to make sure that everything's in compliance, you can make sure that EMF reports that have been generated are being generated to the correct standard that is applicable to you and your requirements. Okay, and then some general prediction settings that you can review and validate to get a little insight into how those predictions are configured, right? Are they using the correct propagation model? Are they using the default settings? You can kind of just validate that real quick. And you'll also notice, and we'll talk about this a little more detail in just a moment here, but you have access to some legend information. Okay, so more on that coming up here in just a second. Okay, so once you've validated the project properties and the project settings, you might want to start reviewing some of the design setup, right? Maybe you'll want to see if your building is accurately modeled, right? So you can go through the floor plans, but you'll also have access to the 3D building viewer, right, where you can check and make sure that all your floors are lined up and that everything is properly modeled, right? It's probably one of the most critical steps to an RF design validation, right? Making sure everything's to scale, everything's lined up, all of your floors are in the right order. Yeah, so the 3D viewer helps you achieve that, right, and make sure that the 3D model is accurate. A new feature in Viewer Plus is the ability to then export that building model to Google Earth, right? So you can now in Viewer Plus export the building model in a KML format, which is Google Maps or Google Earth XML format that has all the building vector information and lets you actually represent the 3D building in a Google map. Okay, so that's a new feature that's been added in Viewer Plus, so you'll have access to that. You can also now validate the scale of the floor, right? So you'll notice you have now the ruler interface here in the home ribbon, so you can create a ruler. Let's turn on the ruler layer in our layer control here, right? So if I turn on my ruler, I can now see the rulers that has already been applied in the project. I can double click on it, right? If you're an existing viewer user, just the fact that I was able to double click on this ruler and pull up its properties, that should be new to you, and you should, that should be something that I'm sure if you're a viewer user, you've wished you could do in the past, right? Just click on something and view its properties. You can now do that. You're not locked to the pan cursor that you are with the base viewer. Okay, so now I can double click on the ruler, I can check the properties, make sure the scale is correct. If I want to take some additional measurements, right, and if I just want to, make sure that, things are, measured correctly, I can also, create my own rulers, right, draw my own rulers and, just make sure that, the scale of things are correct and according to my expectations. Okay, so once we've validated some of the design and modeling aspects of the project, we can also start looking at the design validation, right? Like the RF and viewing the predictions, viewing the survey information. That's an essential part of the review as well, right? So you want to make sure that your design is in compliance with the design KPI requirements. I'm looking at an RSRP prediction here on this floor, right? An LTE RSRP map. One thing I'll notice is there's no legend here for me to, really make sense of this map, or this heat map. Oftentimes, if something was missing in Viewer in the design project, you open it up in Viewer and, that missing legend now requires you to go back and contact the designer, ask them to add the legend and send it back to you. Of course, we don't want to go through that back and forth. You now have access to all of the legends in design. You can add the legends yourself. You don't have to go back to, the RF designer or, whoever created the design. You can simply add the legend yourself. You can view all of the legend, the heat map details, right? The percentage per, range. You can see the average, you can see the operator name. So all of the details of the legend that help you make sense of the heat map and not just a visual indication of, what's what. You can actually see what the actual values represent. Of course, I mentioned earlier, you can click on things, right? So, if, this new lock functionality has been added to the layer control. So previously you were only able to turn on or off layers in the visibility controls, but you can also now lock or unlock layers, which means that, if a certain layer was locked in the original design, you can unlock it so you can actually interact with it. So let's say our parts layer was locked in the design. You can unlock that. You can unlock the IDs and the labels, which is useful, for example, if you've got things overlapping on the project, right? So here, for example, on this small cell here, I've got the part ID overlapping with the model and the system information of this part, right? So I can kind of move that out of the way if I want. So I can see the part IDs for the two parts here, right? So you've got overlapping small cells here. We've got one for 5GNR. We've got a small cell for LTE. So you can actually now see two APs, right? So previously, if there were parts that were stacked on top of each other, you had no way of seeing what was underlying below the surface. So now you actually are able to view things that are underneath each other. But more than that, right? You can just like we double clicked on the ruler to view its properties, you can double click on a part and see its properties. So this is very useful, right? Viewing the part properties, making sure that the correct part is used, making sure that the band properties are accurate, making sure that the correct model has been used, that it's actually set to the proper settings, right? What's the tilt on this, mechanical tilt on this radio transceiver. And you can also view the patterns, right? So viewing the antenna patterns, as Kelly showed in her slide, this gives you a lot more information to better interpret what you're seeing here on the predictions, right? So maybe you're seeing that, if I replace this with something with, wall mounted, right? This is a ceiling mount pattern. Maybe I want something that's wall mounted to give me better coverage in a certain direction, right? I can do that. Now I have the ability to validate that and give that feedback to the design engineer. I can also view the source properties, right, which is important. You can see the power settings, power per channel, how it's configured, if you have the correct bands and blocks and bandwidth set up. So a lot more that you can validate just by clicking on some properties here. We talked about reviewing predictions here. I want to also mention that you can now also review the outdoor predictions, right? So if you have a iBwave Reach project, you can view the outdoor predictions as well, right? So that's very useful in the case where this is an indoor-outdoor design and the design includes the outdoor predictions as well. Now you can actually visualize that as well in iBwave Viewer. Okay, so let's go back to our design validation here, and we were talking about clicking on some small cells and viewing their properties. You have some right-click options as well, right? Now that you are able to click on stuff, you actually have some contextual menu options. You can reset label locations. One that I like and that I find would be very useful for a design reviewer is to view the design sibling, right? You couldn't do this in Viewer Basic before. You couldn't find the equivalent component on the design plan. I've got a very messy design plan here just to illustrate how easy it is now to locate the actual component in the design plan, right? So I can find the exact one from the floor. I can go from the design plan back to the floor sibling, right? So a lot more control in what I'm actually seeing here and reviewing. We looked at individual part properties. Of course, it's also often important to bulk validate or validate in group. I can now right click and select all components, so all of these small cells. What that lets me do is now view the properties kind of in a group, right, for all of these sources, all of these small cells. I can check the models. I can see that they're all set up properly, that they all have the correct band properties, they all have the correct source details, and just like what I reviewed on the individual small cell, now I can view all of those properties through the properties panel. Okay, so that's a lot more capabilities in terms of validating the actual design. It's not just predictions, right? You also want to validate your survey information, or maybe you want to review what the survey looks like. So here on this floor, I've got some surveys that have been conducted, right? So I can, view, for example, here for this RSRP map, right? So I can look at the survey data there, or for this LTE rather, right? So here I see the LTE survey data. I'm looking at the RSRP survey. So you can actually visualize that and view it as well. And you're also able to view the survey data interpolation, right? So that also lets you validate the survey data. If that survey legend was missing, you can also add the survey legend yourself, so you can make sense of the survey information. Okay, so we've covered project validation, we've covered some of the design validation. There's the collaboration piece, right, which we mentioned started with being able to collaborate through iBwave Unity, but you also want to be able to generate reports. You also want to be able to provide feedback based on your review, right? So, you know, that's where the reports menu comes into play. You have a couple of new reports that are available in Viewer Plus. You have the antennas report and the cable routing report, which were previously not available. So these are new reports that now give you a ton of information, especially from an installer perspective, you know, knowing the antenna locations, all the antenna ERPs, and antenna models, and the cable routing, which helps you see, you know, cables that are going from which part to, you know, source to target parts and where they're actually connected through the cable routing report. But I want to specifically call out the annotations report, right? Because that's where Kelly mentioned you can now collaborate on things a bit and actually provide feedback that maybe you were doing previously through emails or screenshots. You know, I'm gonna show the ability to add an annotation to the project. Now, I think it's, you know, everyone who's been a viewer user or who knows about viewer knows and understands that this is a read-only version of the project. So keep in mind, you know, I think it's important to call out and mention again, right? These things that I'm doing, like moving parts around or adding rulers or, you know, validating the scale, these are just actions I can take while I'm reviewing, right? There's no method to save any of these changes, right? So keep that in mind as you're reviewing. You know, maybe don't spend too much time moving things to the precise locations, and, you know, you won't be able to save those changes, so don't spend your time there. Rather, spend time putting those comments in the annotations that are available now in Viewer Plus. And annotations allow you to drop a push pin on the floor plan and, you know, essentially provide feedback to your peers, your stakeholders, through the annotation report, right? So you can, sorry, I'm not gonna generate the report just yet, but I'm gonna add an actual annotation here. Give me a second here. Let's cancel that. But if I go back to the home ribbon, I can add an annotation here and I have access to all the different annotations. You know, I mentioned earlier, maybe, you know, you wanna replace this small cell, right? Take note of the warning here telling you that these can't be saved, but they will be included in the report that you generate. Okay, so once I hit OK, now I can add an annotation here, like a text annotation, right? So I'll hit add, and, you know, I'll enter some text, right? To here, I'll say, replace this omnidirectional small cell with a directional model to improve coverage in the corridor. And I'll hit OK. And, you know, I've got that annotation here. If you're familiar with annotations, you'll notice that this is different from the typical annotations. They're blue. That's to better distinguish them from the original annotations that are on the floor, right? So these are the red ones that are originally in the design. And this is the new one that you, a Viewer Plus user, has added for collaborative purposes and to share your feedback. So that's an example of an annotation. I'll just, you know, leave it there and I'll show you what that does now that I can generate an annotation report. So here's the, you know, the annotation report that I was showing earlier. Now if I hit generate, okay, it'll take a minute to, you know, load those annotations for the floor plans. Okay, so here I just gotta ignore this warning. Again, that's telling me that there are some annotations that are missing some images, so we can ignore that warning for now. Okay, we'll let the report generate and compile, and you know, you can see all the typical annotations, right? Everything here that is relevant to the original design, annotations that have been collected on the field or through survey. But most importantly, you now have also the annotation that you've added, the Viewer Plus annotation, where you've asked your collaborator to replace that omnidirectional small cell with a directional model. And if they scroll through this, you send this to them. Now you have a digital record of the annotations and comments and feedback that you've created. And they can really scroll through it quickly and quickly find those blue viewer plus annotations and know exactly the feedback that you've provided. Or maybe I'm on the field and I've got Viewer Plus open and I've got questions about this design, and this layout doesn't match any of the cable routes, or nothing's lining up. I can add that feedback here and send it back to the designer as a field tester. Okay, so that's the collaboration that this annotation report enables. Of course, you can export this annotation report in many different formats, right? So you have access to all these formats. PDF's a good one for sharing, right? It's generally not too large, and it'll, compress the images, and you can then shoot that off to your collaborators. We're running out of time, and I know we mentioned we wanted to save some time for comments and questions. So that's essentially it. This is the this is the Viewer Plus. This is what it enables: much more control over what you could previously do. And much more collaboration and feedback, and better integration with the design workflow.
Great, thanks, Isam. So we are close to time, and there's not a lot of questions. Well, there is some, but a lot of it you kind of covered as we went, so I'm not going to go through them. But one question is there a way to kind of upgrade through the software itself, or what's the, how does one upgrade?
Yes.
If they're viewer?
So if you've got the regular viewer, the free download viewer, you'll actually be able to, you see a link in the home ribbon that will say, upgrade to Viewer Plus. It'll be a red Viewer Plus icon. You click on it, it'll take you straight to the store where you can download it. And then you'll immediately upon purchase be provided a serial number, and you can then just click the activate button, enter your serial number, and there's no further installation that's needed. This viewer will automatically restart and transform into Viewer Plus mode with all of that additional functionality.
Okay, great. And just one more question popped up here. Can you hover over the RF port type to tell what the connector type is?
Yes, yeah, you can do that. I don't have any. Okay, let's go to the design sibling here where we can actually see some of the ports. So here I can hover over that, right? And then I can see the type of connector. This is a female port, a female N-type port. It's a mobile side port, meaning it's an output port, an input port. So, sorry, an output port rather. And so you can see that information just by hovering over the ports.
Okay, great, thanks. I think that's all the questions. To those who are, curious in getting iBwave Viewer Plus, as Isam showed, you can upgrade if you have Viewer today, or it is available on the iBwave store as well. You can purchase online. The cost is $1,499 subscription fee. You can use the QR code, or there's the link on the screen. So thanks to everyone for joining us today. We hope you found it valuable and informational. And yeah, have a great day. And thanks, Isam.
Thanks, everyone.